Warning: All Things Crime is a true crime production that may contain violent or disturbing material. Viewer or listener discretion is advised. Hey guys, Jared here. This is part one with my discussion with Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith of the National Police Association. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome to All Things Crime. I am super excited to have an amazing guest this morning. Her name's Betsy Brantner Smith, and she is as far as law enforcement goes, she's the jack of all trades, has been around for a long time, and I tell you, I'm more than excited to have her on. Betsy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you.
Oh, fantastic. So let's go through your resume a little bit. First of all, 29 years serving in law enforcement in various areas, mostly in Illinois, my understanding.
Yes, I actually became a police dispatcher in my little town in Illinois when I was a senior in high school. I worked the 4 to 12 shift, and I think my dad thought that would keep me out of trouble. And so I had a fun senior year in high school listening to the radio of all my friends getting in trouble. And then I went to college and I was a dispatcher. And 2 weeks out of college, I found myself at age 21 in the Cook County Sheriff's Police Academy just outside of Chicago, a little bit of a culture shock. And I had 29 great years. I loved law enforcement. And I'm still, a big part of the profession now. Can't seem to give it up.
Yeah, well, once it gets in your blood, I had 14 years in the military. And I'll tell you, it's... I've been out for, almost 20 years now, but amazingly, it's such an ingrained part of you that it's impossible to give it up.
Yep.
And why would you want to, right?
Well, exactly. And I was very fortunate that I had a kind of a parallel career as I was, moving up, doing different things in law enforcement. I was a trainer locally, and then I got a little bit of statewide attention. Then I got some national attention, and ended up writing for a bunch of different entities. And then I got a job with the Law Enforcement Television Network. Some old time cops will remember that, LETN, which was kind of a CNN for cops at the time, and got a show on there. And then everything just exploded. I ended up becoming still am the only female instructor for the Street Survival Seminar. And then we started our own company with my husband, Dave Smith, who, again, a lot of cops know is J.D. Buck Savage. So I'm also Mrs. J.D. Buck Savage. And that's what we do now. We run around and we're training cops, and we write a lot of articles. And now I'm the spokesman for the National Police Association. So you can see me on Newsmax and Fox News and Town Hall and on Dinesh D'Souza's podcast, and I have my own show on Pluto and the the NPA Report, and boy, I'll tell you, I'm busy and life is good.
That is awesome. Yeah, I was going to mention that you were the national spokesperson for the National Police Association, so that is awesome. Obviously, you're in the know and understand everything that's going on around the country with law enforcement.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's really it's a difficult time for law enforcement. There's this anti-police, defund the police sentiment happening that, we dealt with this back in a post-Ferguson world, after the completely justified Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri. There was this anti-police sentiment that was largely perpetuated by the president. We really coming out of that. We had a pro guy in the White House, and things were looking really good. And crime was pretty low comparatively in the United States because the economy was good. Then the George Floyd situation happened in Minneapolis. And this whole anti-cop sentiment, again, just exploded. And now we're seeing crime on the rise, especially violent crime. It's crazy. And I'm sure you talk about this, that we, in 2020, we recorded the highest ever homicide rate in our nation's history. That's just crazy. And here we are dealing with all that, and still there's so much talk of reimagine policing, defund policing, and it's happening all over the country. It's crazy.
Another thing that is really crazy about it is how concentrated it is in certain areas. Because
Yes.
when even though it's nationwide, and yes, the crime rate as a whole is ticking up, and I think that's from a lot of that attitude that you're talking about, and that stems from our quote unquote leadership, but it's not everywhere. I live in Utah, and other than downtown Salt Lake, even after the George Floyd incident, there was one night of rioting, and then the Salt Lake City PD and other agencies around there, they shut that thing down. And we haven't had any rioting in Utah since. And so most of this crime is pretty locally based. And I think that, again, is a direct relationship with and a reflection from the local leadership. I mean, I look at Portland, for example. I just see absolutely no excuse for that. And that is totally allowed by the Portland mayor.
It's almost encouraged.
Yeah, which is sad, because we were talking earlier about Dion Joseph, and I'm a huge fan of his, especially on LinkedIn. And by the way, any of our listeners, you absolutely need to get on social media and follow Betsy, and also follow some of my other guests that I've had. Some of these just absolute fantastic patriot and wonderful people. So you need to follow them and definitely understand what they understand, because without policing, without a strong law enforcement across the country, you think the chaos is bad now. I can't even imagine how bad it would be if this whole defund the police. Well, ironically, the defund the police movement that started in Minneapolis, they've turned around because of this crime spike. And they've basically said, oops, guess we need to allocate, what was it, $6.4 million or something like that toward bolstering up the police agency now that they've decimated it.
Well, yeah, they ended up having to, they took $9 million out of the police budget. They ended up having to come back and put 6.4 million back into it just to try and recruit new police officers and get them trained, because Minneapolis PD is down over 200 cops. They've got about 150 police officers who have put in for disability, largely related to the George Floyd riots. And a lot of the disability claims that are being processed right now are for post-traumatic stress. If people knew what really happened during the George Floyd riots of May 2020 to the Minneapolis Police Department, they would be absolutely astounded. Those officers, and we've talked to them, they felt that they were left to die. They were running 3 and 4 to a patrol car. They had outdated riot gear. Not everybody even had a helmet. And they had minimal communication with leadership. They were told, no matter what happens, you're going to have to not arrest anybody. And then those officers at the 3rd precinct were forced to watch as the 3rd precinct was burned to the ground by Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioters. They watched their home burn down, and they were not allowed to arrest anybody. It was just it's an unbelievably horrific situation. And unfortunately, we're about to revisit that because, we're coming into jury selection for Officer Derek Chauvin. They already have erected, fences around the Hennepin County Courthouse. They're bringing in the National Guard, and it's just going to be horrible for the community, for the local businesses, and for the police officers.
You want to hear something really amazing is Hennepin County up in Minneapolis purchased an M-Vac system. And if you don't know what an M-Vac is, it's a wet vacuum system designed to collect DNA. And I am headed up there next week. So
Awesome.
yeah, so I'm not telling my wife what's going on up there, but I'll tell her when I get back. But
Guess where I was, honey?
yeah, yeah, during jury selection, and they said, yeah, everything's boarded up, but we're not really concerned yet until like around the end of April, when they're basically lining themselves up that it doesn't matter what the outcome of this jury or what this court case is, it's going to be ugly. So
Yes.
if he's convicted, there'll be rioting. If he's not guilty, there will be rioting. And so again, that is all based on the county, the city, and the state leadership that these are all politicians. And so I think there's so much just concerned with their own careers as opposed to doing what's right. And I think that's one of the saddest parts of what's happening in the United States right now is everybody looks at it through the lens of political expediency and really how is this going to benefit my career, as opposed to really what is right for the people, and allowing BLM or whoever it is burn the place down because they're upset about the outcome of a trial. Or now, don't get me wrong, everybody, and including every cop that I've talked to, is just horrified by what happened to George Floyd. Nobody disputes that. But to allow the crimes that happen afterwards, it's like, why justify one with another?
Exactly. And that's the frustration. And then when we see, now in a post George Floyd era, we see various officer involved shootings, like the Rayshard Brooks shooting in Atlanta, the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. These were justified law enforcement uses of force. And yet, there are the riots and the lies in the media. And it's incredibly frustrating. It goes back to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, where Officer Darren Wilson ended up shooting Michael Brown, who was trying to take his gun, trying to kill him. And 3 times now, Officer Darren Wilson has been found to have done no wrongdoing. And yet both he and his wife, who was also a cop, they can't work in law enforcement, and so careers were ruined because of a national temper tantrum over something that was justified. And that's the frustration. When you talk about police leadership, is one of the things that our police leaders need to do is stand up when police officers do the right thing and say, we did the right thing. It's unfortunate when we have to use deadly force on somebody. That's one of the things because you have the same opportunity I do to interview really solid people in the law enforcement profession and beyond. One of the best interviews I ever did was with Chief James Craig from Detroit PD. And when you look at the post George Floyd era, you'll notice that Detroit never burned. There were peaceful protests, but Detroit never burned to the ground. And that's because they have a strong police chief who gets out there in front of people and says, look, here's what we did. Here's why we had to do it. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. I'll get you more information. And he's always out there talking to the community and talking to the media. And he works with the community. He doesn't kowtow to them. That's real leadership.
Being in the corporate world, I look at these kind of things and I said, imagine the CEO of a company, something goes sideways, like they have a product problem or something like that. And the first thing they do is they say, you know what, either I'm not going to say anything and I'm just going to let the media narrative or whatever happen, or I'm going to go out there and make excuses for it and allow my company building to be burned down because people are mad at the product being, none of it makes sense. It's like, look, if you want to be called a police chief, or if you want to be called a city commissioner or a city council person or a mayor, then there's a certain obligation that you have to not only your employees, but to all of your citizens, not just the people that are mad. And they can be mad. It says in the First Amendment, you have every right to peacefully protest. But the moment you pick up a rock or something and throw it through a window, you have now the entire game has changed, and you are no longer a peaceful protester, and they can't
Now you're a
tolerate that.
violent rioter.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
can't tolerate violence.
right.
And there have been several police chiefs who have lost their jobs over the last 10, 11 months, like Chief Carmen Best in Seattle. She ended up retiring because she stood up for her officers. She denounced the violence. She denounced things like Chaz Chop, and she ended up, having to leave. And there were other police chiefs, the city council or the mayor, whatever wants me to do, and I'm gonna kowtow to the rage mob. And we just can't do that. We cannot give in to the rage mob. When you become a police officer, you, just like when you serve in the military, you end up raising your hand and saying that you will defend the Constitution. And the Constitution says peaceful protest is appropriate. Violent rioting is not.
And there's something else that I've spoken to numerous interviews about, and that is the only person that hates a bad cop more than anybody else is a good cop. And
Exactly.
when you have 99% of the entire 700,000 cops out there that really detest the bad cops, and because they all pay for the sins of the few. And when that happens, they will get rid of them. And, people have to be, just like eventually the bad doctors will be discovered, and they'll get rid of them. They'll lose their medical license or whatever. And it's amazing that nobody talks about canceling doctors,
or defunding them. Right. I mean, that's what, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we talk about that a lot. 250,000 people a year die from medical mistakes.
Yeah.
And yet nobody's out protesting in hospitals. Nobody's calling to defund the doctors. Nobody's calling to put the doctors in prison, and get rid of the whole profession.
Yeah.
Imagine if American law enforcement would, we end up, American law enforcement ends up killing about 8 to 15 unarmed people a year. Now, most of those people were trying to kill a cop with either take the cop's gun, obtaining a weapon that they didn't have, running us over with a car. It's a very rare occurrence. And that's one of the things that again, we call leadership into task, is we've got to fight that false narrative that American law enforcement officers are out there hunting down young unarmed Black men to murder. It's just not happening. And Black Lives Matter and Antifa will try to convince you that it is. And they talk about this epidemic of Black people being killed by the police, and that's just false.
And it's sad, because honestly, a really amazing profession and full of really good people. I know a lot of cops, and they are all good people. I'm sure, like I said, I haven't met enough yet. It's just a matter of time, but I haven't met enough that I've actually met somebody that I just look at them and I'm like, that is just not a good dude. And
Right.